I remember the exact moment I stopped being afraid of losing him. It was a Tuesday. Late afternoon light cutting through our kitchen windows the way it always did, turning everything amber and soft. I was standing at the sink, hands submerged in soapy water, watching him through the reflection in the window above the faucet. He was sitting at the table behind me, scrolling through his phone with that particular intensity men get when they're pretending something doesn't matter. His jaw was tight. His shoulders held that specific tension I'd learned to read over 2 decades of marriage, the kind that said he was building toward something. A conversation, a confession, an ending. I knew what was coming before he opened his mouth. 20 years teaches you things. It teaches you the difference between a man who's thinking about dinner and a man who's thinking about freedom. It teaches you that silence isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's just the space where honesty used to be. "Emma," he said, "we need to talk." I dried my hands slowly, folded the towel, turned to face him. He looked older in that light. Or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time in years. The man I'd married at 26 had become this stranger who took phone calls in the garage and smiled at his screen in ways he never smiled at me. "I've been thinking," he continued, and I watched him arrange his face into something he probably thought looked tortured, conflicted. Like this was hard for him. About us, about where we are. I sat down across from him, waited. "I don't think this is working anymore," he said. "I don't think it has been for a while." The words hung there between us like smoke. I could have reached out and touched them, could have watched them dissolve in my hands. Instead, I just looked at him. Really looked at him. "Okay," I said. He blinked. "Okay?" "Okay." He'd expected something else. Tears probably. Pleading. That performance of feminine desperation men seem to need when they're leaving. Proof that they mattered, that their absence will create a wound. I didn't give him that. "I want a divorce, Emma." "All right," I said. "I'll call a lawyer tomorrow." The confusion on his face was almost beautiful. Almost. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known because he'd stopped paying attention to me somewhere around year 15, was that I'd been planning this exit for 7 months. 7 months since I'd found the credit card statement he'd forgotten to hide. 7 months since I'd seen the hotel charges, the restaurant receipts from places we'd never been together, the jewelry purchase that never made it home to me. 7 months since I'd realized my marriage was already over. I was just the last one to be told. But I didn't confront him. I didn't cry or accuse or demand explanations. I did something smarter. I disappeared into my own life while still standing right next to him. I'd started with the money, quietly, carefully, the way you'd dismantle a bomb. I opened a separate bank account at a different bank across town. I began redirecting my freelance income there, small amounts at first, then larger. Consulting work, editing projects. Payments from clients who'd always appreciated my work more than my husband appreciated my existence. Every deposit was a brick in the foundation of my future. I documented everything, screenshots of texts I found on his iPad when he was in the shower, photos of receipts, a timeline of his late nights and weekend work trips that lined up too perfectly with gaps in our shared calendar. I didn't need proof for me, I already knew, but I'd need it for the divorce. I'd consulted with an attorney, not just any attorney, the best divorce lawyer in the city, a woman with a reputation for elegant cruelty and settlements that made men wish they'd been kinder to their wives. "Document everything," she told me in that first consultation. "Financial records, property, his assets, any evidence of infidelity, and whatever you do, don't let him know you're preparing until you're ready." So I didn't. I'd become a ghost in my own home, pleasant, accommodating, unremarkable. I'd cooked his dinners and washed his clothes and asked about his day with the same mild interest you'd show a neighbor. I'd stopped initiating conversations that mattered, stopped trying to bridge the distance between us. I'd let him think I was simply settling into comfortable middle-aged complacency. He had no idea I was building an exit strategy brick by careful brick. I transferred important documents, birth certificates, insurance policies, tax returns, to a safety deposit box he didn't know about. I'd changed passwords on my personal accounts. I'd made copies of everything that mattered and stored them in 3 different locations. I'd even started individual therapy, something I told him was just self-care. What I didn't mention was that I was preparing for the emotional aftermath of ending a 20-year marriage to a man I'd once loved more than breathing. The therapist had helped me see it clearly. I wasn't leaving because I was angry. I was leaving because I'd finally learned the difference between being married and being erased. "You've been doing the emotional labor of 2 people for years," she told me. "You've been managing his feelings, his comfort, his image, while your own needs became invisible, even to you." She was right. I'd spent 2 decades making myself smaller so he could feel bigger, dimming my own light so his could shine, apologizing for things that weren't my fault just to keep the peace. That's what they don't tell you about long marriages, how easy it is to lose yourself one small compromise at a time, one swallowed opinion, one unexpressed need, one moment of putting his comfort before your truth. 20 years of those moments, and suddenly you're a stranger to yourself. But I'd found my way back. Those 7 months hadn't just been about practical preparation. They'd been about reclaiming the woman I'd been before I'd decided that being loved meant making myself convenient. I'd started saying no, small no's at first. No, I can't pick up your dry cleaning. No, I'm not cooking tonight. No, I have plans. Watching him adjust to my boundaries had been fascinating. Watching him sulk when I stopped organizing his life had been even better. I'd reconnected with friends I'd let drift away because he never liked them. Always found them too loud or too opinionated or too much. Turned out they'd just been too real, too willing to ask if I was happy, too likely to notice when I wasn't. I'd started dressing for myself again. Not for him, not for some imagined male gaze, but for the woman I saw in the mirror every morning who was slowly coming back to life. I'd taken up running, started painting again, something I'd abandoned when he'd made one too many dismissive comments about my little hobby. I'd filled my calendar with things that had nothing to do with him, and I'd stopped performing the role of devoted wife. That's what he'd really noticed, I think. Not that I was preparing to leave. He was too self-absorbed for that level of awareness, but that I'd stopped centering my entire existence around his needs and moods and comfort. I'd stopped waiting for him. Now, sitting across from him in the kitchen, where I'd made thousands of meals he'd barely tasted, watching him struggle to understand why I wasn't falling apart, I felt something unexpected. Relief. I think we should talk about the details, he said, recovering slightly, still trying to control the narrative. How we'll divide things. The house, assets. My attorney will handle that, I said. Another blink. Your attorney? I assumed you already had one, I said calmly. Or were you planning to spring this on me without preparation, expecting me to just accept whatever terms you offered? His face shifted. I watched him recalculate, watched the wheels turn, as he realized this wasn't going to be the easy exit he'd imagined. Men like him always assume their wives will be reasonable, will prioritize keeping the peace over protecting themselves, will be too embarrassed or too broken to fight back. He'd forgotten who I'd been before I married him. I'd built a career. I'd negotiated contracts. I'd survived a childhood that taught me early that you don't rely on anyone to save you, you save yourself. I'd just forgotten those lessons somewhere in the middle of trying to be a good wife. I've already filed, I added. You'll be served papers tomorrow. The color drained from his face. You what? I filed for divorce. This morning, actually. I was going to tell you this weekend, but you've saved me the trouble of timing it. But you just wanted to tell me first, I finished. You wanted to be the one who decided, the one in control. I stood up, pushed my chair in carefully. The problem, Michael, is that you stopped being in control of this marriage the moment you stopped being present in it. Emma, I know about her, I said quietly. I've known for 7 months. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Don't, I interrupted. Don't insult me by lying. I have the credit card statements, the hotel receipts, text messages you thought you deleted. I have enough evidence to ensure this divorce goes exactly the way it should. Equitably, honestly, with full disclosure of all assets. He looked like I'd hit him. You've been spying on me? The audacity of men who cheat always amazes me. The way they make themselves the victim the moment they're caught. I've been protecting myself, I corrected. There's a difference. I walked to the counter, picked up my car keys. Where are you going? Out, I said. I have plans. We need to talk about this. No, I said. We don't. We needed to talk about this months ago, years ago, back when you decided whatever was missing in your life was more important than what we'd built together, but you didn't talk to me then. You just checked out and expected me to pretend not to notice. I headed toward the door. Emma, wait. I stopped, looked back at him. I gave you 20 years, Michael. 20 years of my life, my youth, my energy. I made you dinner when I was exhausted. I listened to you complain about your job, your stress, your problems, while ignoring my own. I built my schedule around yours. I made this house a home. I showed up. My voice stayed steady, calm. And you repaid that by treating me like furniture, something that was always there, so you stopped seeing it, stopped caring if it was comfortable or beautiful or worth maintaining. You took my presence for granted until you found something shinier. He opened his mouth, closed it. I'm done being taken for granted, I said. I'm done making myself small so you can feel big. I'm done apologizing for taking up space in my own life. I opened the door. You'll hear from my lawyer. I drove to Sarah's house. Sarah, my oldest friend, the one who'd raised her eyebrows 2 years ago when I'd said everything was fine, who'd known I was lying but loved me enough to wait until I was ready to admit it. She opened the door before I could knock, pulled me inside, and handed me a glass of wine that was already poured. You told him, she said, not a question. He told me first, actually. She laughed. Of course he did. Men always want to be the ones who leave. We sat in her living room, the one that always smelled like vanilla candles and felt like safety. And I told her everything. The 7 months of planning, the separate bank account, the documentation, the attorney, his face when he realized I wasn't going to beg. God, I wish I could have seen that, she said. Michael always thought he was so much smarter than everyone else. He is smart, I said. He's just not as smart as he thinks. And he's lazy. He assumed I'd be too hurt or too scared to protect myself. Underestimating you was always his biggest mistake, Sarah said. She raised her glass. To new beginnings. To endings that should have happened sooner, I countered. We drank to both. The next 3 months were a masterclass in why preparation matters. Michael had assumed this would be a simple split, a no-fault divorce, clean and easy. What he hadn't counted on was that I'd been documenting everything, including assets he'd tried to hide, the offshore account, the investment property he'd bought with his brother, using our joint money but only his name on the deed, the retirement account he'd been slowly draining for his emergency fund, which turned out to be the fund for his new life with her. My attorney was magnificent. She was in her 50s, sharp as glass, with silver hair and the kind of smile that made opposing counsel nervous. Men who cheat always hide money, she told me. They start planning their exit long before they tell their wives, but they get sloppy. They think their wives are too trusting or too stupid to notice. She'd hired a forensic accountant. We found everything. Michael's attorney tried to negotiate, tried to paint me as vindictive, money-hungry, unwilling to be reasonable. Your client committed adultery and financial fraud, my attorney responded in an email I was CC'd on. My client is simply asking for what she's legally entitled to. If your client wanted a gentler divorce, he should have been a better husband, I framed that email. The discovery process was brutal for him. Every hidden account exposed. Every lie about where money had gone laid bare. His mistress, 32, worked in his office. Everything you'd expect. Suddenly became nervous about being deposed. Apparently being the other woman is fun until there are legal consequences. Michael tried to talk to me directly, 3 weeks into the process. Showed up at the house, which I'd been awarded temporary residence of. Looking exhausted and angry. This is insane, Emma. You're trying to destroy me. No, I said, standing in the doorway without inviting him in. I'm trying to rebuild myself. There's a difference. I made a mistake. You made 1,000 mistakes, I interrupted. 1,000 choices to prioritize yourself over us. Over me. One affair would have been a mistake. This was a pattern. I never meant to hurt you. That's what they always say, as if intention matters more than impact. But you did hurt me, I said. You hurt me every time you came home late without calling. Every time you looked at your phone instead of at me. Every time you made me feel like I was asking for too much by wanting to feel loved in my own marriage. I did love you. Past tense, I noted. Interesting. He ran his hand through his hair. That gesture I'd once found endearing. You're being cruel. I'm being honest. You're the one confusing the two. I closed the door. The divorce was finalized 4 months after that Tuesday in the kitchen. I got the house, half of his retirement account, alimony for 5 years, not because I needed it, but because I'd earned it. 20 years of unpaid emotional labor, of making his life easier while mine got harder, of sacrificing my own ambitions to support his. The final settlement was more than fair. It was justice. Michael moved in with her 2 weeks after the papers were signed. I heard through mutual friends, the ones who'd chosen sides, mostly landing on mine once they heard the full story, that it wasn't going well. Turned out that once he wasn't sneaking around, once the relationship had to exist in actual daylight, it wasn't quite as exciting. Turned out she expected him to be present and communicative and invested. Turned out he was exactly the same man with her that he'd been with me. That should have made me happy. The schadenfreude should have been delicious. Instead, I just felt sorry for her. She'd learn what I'd learned, maybe faster, maybe slower. But she'd learned that you can't fix a man who doesn't think he's broken. Can't fill a void that someone else created. Can't love someone into being better when they don't think they need to change. I'd wasted 20 years learning that lesson. I hoped she'd be smarter. As for me, I was learning what it felt like to live for myself again. I kept the house, but changed everything in it. New furniture, new paint. I turned his office into an art studio, the one I'd always wanted but never had room for because his needs took up all the space. I took a pottery class, started hiking on weekends, joined a book club where we actually talked about books instead of about our husband's shortcomings. I dated casually, nothing serious. Learned that I could enjoy male company without needing male approval, that I could sleep with someone without needing them to validate my worth. I learned that I was whole, all by myself. I started a consulting business, the one I'd been thinking about for years but never pursued, because Michael had always said it was too risky. It turned out I was good at it, better than good. Within 6 months, I was making more than I'd ever made in my marriage. The money felt different when it was mine, when I'd earned it without having to justify every purchase or explain why I deserved to invest in myself. I bought expensive wine because I liked it, not because we were entertaining. I traveled Italy, Portugal, Iceland, places I'd always wanted to see but never suggested because Michael only liked beach resorts where he could ignore me in more scenic locations. I learned to eat dinner alone without feeling lonely, learned the difference between solitude and isolation. I learned what peace felt like. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Michael at a coffee shop downtown. I was meeting a client. He was alone, looking at his phone with that same intensity. "Emma," he said when he saw me. He looked startled, uncomfortable. "Michael," I replied pleasantly. We stood there for a moment, two people who'd once known every detail of each other's lives, now strangers with shared history. "You look good," he said finally. I did. I knew I did. I'd stopped dressing for invisibility and started dressing for power. I'd stopped apologizing for taking up space. "Thank you. How are you?" "Excellent," I said honestly. "Really excellent." He nodded, shifted his weight. "I heard about your business, that it's doing well." "It is?" Another pause. The barista called my name. I collected my coffee. "Emma, he started. "I've been thinking about everything, about us, about how it ended." I waited. "I think I made a mistake." There it was. The regret that comes too late. The realization that arrives after the consequences are permanent. "Probably," I agreed, "but it's done now. I just want you to know that I'm sorry for how I handled things, for hurting you." I looked at him, really looked at him. Saw the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the slight stoop in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He looked diminished somehow, smaller. Or maybe I'd just grown bigger. "I appreciate that," I said. "But I don't need your apology, Michael. I needed it 2 years ago, 5 years ago, a decade ago when you first started checking out. I needed it all those times I asked if we were okay, and you told me I was imagining things." I adjusted my bag on my shoulder. "I don't need it now. I'm okay without it. Could we maybe?" "No," I said gently but firmly. "Whatever you're about to ask, the answer is no. We're done, Michael. We've been done. I've made peace with that. You should too." I walked toward the door. "Emma, wait." I turned back one last time. "I spent 20 years waiting for you to see me, to choose me, to love me the way I loved you. I'm done waiting." I left him standing there. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and watched the city lights. My city, my life, my peace. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, sitting in that kitchen, hands in soapy water, watching her marriage end in a reflection, terrified and determined and ready. I thought about all the work it had taken to get here, the planning, the strength, the willingness to walk away from 20 years because staying would have cost me 20 more. I thought about Michael's face today, the regret, the confusion, the realization that coming too late. People say revenge changes you. They're wrong. Revenge reveals you. It reveals what you're capable of when you stop making yourself small, when you stop prioritizing someone else's comfort over your own survival, when you finally remember that you don't need permission to protect yourself. My revenge wasn't destroying Michael. It was building a life so completely my own that his absence didn't leave a hole. It left space for work that fulfilled me, for friendships that nourished me, for art and travel and wine and books and mornings where I woke up, and the first thought wasn't about what someone else needed. My revenge was becoming whole again. I raised my glass to the city lights. "To exits planned in silence," I whispered, "to women who save themselves, to endings that become beginnings." The wine tasted like freedom, and I drank it down to the last drop, down to the last drop. down to the last drop.